This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live.
A very good morning to you on Saturday, the 1st of June 2024. We are talking colour theory today. Why do we use specific colours in our PowerPoint presentations? Why do we use specific colours when we have children with specific learning needs? And why do we mark in specific colours? Stay with me this morning and we will explore all of these things.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live. Tune in live at ttradio.org, or to join in the conversation, download the Podbean app and search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TTRadio. Tune in, talk it out with Teachers Talk Radio.
A very good morning. It is, as I have already said, Saturday, the 1st of June 2024, and here we are, right at the end of the half-term holiday. I cannot believe how quickly this week has gone. It's actually quite mad that it's been a whole week since I was here with you last. Work weeks never seem to go this quickly, do they? It's always the holiday weeks that whiz by. But the positive thing about coming to the end of this half-term holiday is that we are that much closer now to the summer. I personally have got 5 weeks left in school. I know some people will have 6, some will have 7. I hope that no one has more than 7. If you do, my thoughts are absolutely with you. But we are getting there. We have almost made it to the finish line. Our GCSE and A-level exams are in full swing. SATs, I believe, are all completely out of the way by this point. Please do correct me if I'm wrong, but I think they are all done by now. In my case, my year 7s and my year 9s have sat their exams. I've got my year 8s starting theirs on Monday. But that's not too bad because the only year 8 class that I teach is one class of year 8 German. So, yeah, I won't have too many of those to mark. It will just be marking those, writing my last set of reports for the school year, and then we are done. So we are almost there. We are almost there. I like June. As long-time listeners, as long-time friends of the show will know, I'm not a summer person. The holiday aside, of course, I do love me the summer holidays, but I'm not really a summer person. I'm not a sun person. I'm not a shorts person. I much prefer the autumn winter time, but I do like June. I think I like this kind of liminal transitional space from spring into summer. Before it all gets a bit too hot for me, before the sun sets off my seasonal depression, when we're kind of in that in-between space, that in-between time. So yeah, we are in time of year that I really enjoy right now, which is nice. It's a nice space for us to be in. Not a lot has happened this week, of course, because it has been half term. And I will be honest, I've kind of shied away from my teacher social media this week. I haven't really checked Twitter. I'm sure that if you go back through my feed, that will suggest differently, where I've possibly been retweeting things, but I haven't really been reading. I've not really kept up with what's going on in the news, so I'll be excited tomorrow to tune into the week in review and kind of see what I've missed. Now, I'm not one of these teachers that thinks that during holidays we shouldn't think about teaching. Obviously, if that were the case, I wouldn't be here right now because we are still in the holiday. And I do think about teaching. I think about teaching a lot. I'm getting an entire doctorate in education, which requires thinking about teaching. I don't know. this week, it just hasn't really happened. I think the fact that I had an assignment due on Tuesday probably helped to keep me away from everything, because I spent all of Bank Holiday Monday and then a portion of Tuesday morning really focused on tidying up that assignment and getting that in. And then I think I've just spent the rest of the week recovering, which is exactly what half terms should be for. But I can't remember why I told you that now. See, this is what happens when you just speak off the cuff. Sometimes you just launch into a bit of a story and then you have no idea where you are going with it or what you are actually intending to say. This is why lesson plans are a good idea, okay? If you are a trainee teacher, if you are thinking about going into teaching, if you are an ECT, this is why you have to do lesson plans, at least in the beginning of your career, to make sure that everything is planned very, very nicely until you have the experience to be able to go in and do it off the cuff. Because I've been with Teachers Talk Radio, is it 2 years now? I think it's 2 years. I did actually know this the other day when I mentioned it, and now I can't remember. I think it's 2. And I still do these little monologues at the top of the show and have absolutely no idea where I am going with them.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading.
Reading Solutions UK. Are you looking for best practices and innovative strategies to foster confident, lifelong readers? Join the free online International Reading Conference on the 11th, 12th and 13th of June. Hear from speakers like TV personality and education expert Basit Siddiqui, beloved children's author Michael Rosen, fluency expert Tim Rosinski, EEF specialist Chloe Butlin, the National Literacy Trust's Irene Picton, and a range of experienced practitioners, including MATS leaders, deputy heads, heads of English, high-level teaching assistants, and school librarians. Through the 3-day conference, speakers will explore a range of topics at the forefront of the current educational landscape, with sessions relevant for all educators and key stages. Visit Reading Solutions at readingsolutionsuk.co.uk for more information and to sign up for this free conference.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
According to FE Week, Sir Ian Buckham, the interim head of exams regulator Ofqual, is Gillian Keegan's preferred candidate to take on the role permanently. The role of chief regulator will only be confirmed by whoever forms the next government. The current Education Secretary chose to appoint an interim chief regulator for a year after Dr Joe Saxton stepped down to head up UCAS. Sir Ian began the role in January and Ms Keegan has put him forward for the full-time role, following approval from the Prime Minister. However, Sir Ian's pre-appointment hearing with the Parliamentary Education Committee will not take place until after the recently announced general election on July the 4th. It leaves a potential new government facing the decision on whether to keep the current Conservative-approved candidate or find an alternative. The Indian Business Standard News website explores the reasons for a drop in numbers of Indian students choosing the UK as their higher education destination. 21,000 fewer master's degree applicants have registered than in previous years, according to official figures. Anuj Gupta, CEO of Young Rads, said that Indian students are now hesitant to apply due to stricter visa regulations. Gupta went on to point out the financial impact this could have on UK institutions, as they rely heavily on tuition from international students. The article goes on to suggest that the British government has prioritised curbing migration over university student numbers. The article goes on to point out that many Indian students are now considering countries like Germany, which offers a combination of world-class universities, minimal tuition fees, and a low visa rejection rate. In Wales, the BBC reports again on measures some head teachers are taking to save cash as budget squeezes continue. A primary head teacher in Pembrokeshire is reported to be moonlighting as his school's caretaker, seeing to day-to-day maintenance, testing fire alarms and water hygiene, alongside teaching and headship itself. Many other schools are responding by cutting jobs. According to the report, the Welsh Government said its budget was £700 million less in real terms than when it was set by the UK Government in 2021. Councils have confirmed to BBC Wales News that nearly 200 schools have been discussing redundancies in 2024, with cuts largely directed to welfare and support services in schools. The BBC also reports on an open letter sent by head teachers from schools across St Albans to parents. The letter calls on parents not to let their children have a smartphone before they are 14. St Albans Primary Schools Consortium urged parents to wait until Year 9 at secondary school before giving them a device. In it, the letter talks of how the devices could expose children to a number of risks, and that whilst it was understandable that phones could give parents peace of mind, children's phones do not need to have access to the internet in order for you to keep them safe. TeacherTap's survey tool published data last January that suggested only 1% of schools had no restrictions in place at all on phones in schools. But the topic remains a cause for concern, especially as smartphones are now a feature of daily life for most adults, and that some children as young as Year 1 have access to such a device. Finally, a West Yorkshire MP is calling for children to be taught about endometriosis in schools. The condition, which can cause chronic pain, affects about 1.5 million women in the UK, according to figures from charity Endometriosis UK. MP Sir Alex Shelbrooke said he had been shocked by the lack of education surrounding the condition. The Department for Education said new RSHE curriculum proposals included the addition of lessons on menstrual and gynecological health, including endometriosis, polycystic ovary syndrome, and heavy menstrual bleeding. Sir Alex said both girls and boys should learn about all aspects of reproductive health. This has been your Teachers Talk Radio News with Joe Fox.
Earlier this week, I received an email, as I'm sure many of you who are teachers in the audience did, asking my opinion on the colours that we use for marking. A resource creation company wants to start kind of giving away freebies with some of their resources. They thought a nice marking pen would be a good freebie to give away. I absolutely agreed. You cannot get enough stationery. And, they wanted to know what colours people were marking in. Do we still use red? And so, I replied, trying to be helpful, and said, oh no, absolutely not. When I was training 20 years ago, we were told, never use red for marking. It's got negative connotations, all of that sort of thing. And that's still the mentality that we have. And I kind of popped in the email, it'd be interesting to hear what other people have to say. And evidently, I wasn't the only person who kind of wanted to know what the results were, because we got a reply the next day, the day after, I don't remember, from the person who had elicited the first email. And he had sent some of the comments. And we were kind of in consensus that we don't mark in red. But there was a lack of consensus about what colour we do mark in, or what colour we should mark in. The guy who sent the email sent a range of quotes from those of us who have responded, and it seems like every single school has a different policy. The only thing that they kind of had in common was don't mark in red, and children should self-mark in a colour that is different to the colour the teacher uses to mark. And that got me thinking, as many things do. And the first thing that I realized was that we have this habit in educational practice of identifying a problem, but not really ever coming up with a solution. So we identify that red is a bad color to do our marking in, for reasons that we'll talk about a little bit later on this morning. But at no point has anybody ever told us what color we actually should be marking in. There's a problem, but no solution. And I think that's one of the things that when we talk about recruitment and retention, that's one of the things that quite often gets overlooked is the fact that in teaching, we are very often presented with problems and we are very often presented with don't do this. But very little research is done or very little research is presented to us that tries to resolve those problems. So we have a don't do this because it's bad for the children, because, it has psychologically negative events, psychologically negative repercussions. But we're never told you should do this because it has psychologically positive repercussions. And that is actually quite frustrating because you would hope that if we had done a lot of research into what colours we shouldn't use to mark, we should actually also be doing research into what colours we should use to mark. And the fact that we even approach the whole marking debate starting with the negative, starting with this is a problem, red is damaging, as opposed to coming at it from a positive perspective and saying, green is life-giving, blue is everybody's favorite color, whatever it might be. That also, I think, speaks a lot about how we approach the education system. I think we are very conscientious when it comes to looking for problems because we want to make sure that we are always doing the very, very best for our pupils. But I think we don't always look for solutions. And I think that if our profession on the whole wants to survive, if we want to get better, if we want to attract people, if we want to retain people, we do need, as a body of professionals, to become more solutions oriented rather than problems oriented. Now, I say this as if I've come up with a solution, as if I'm going to sit here and in an hour's time, after a lot of build up, tell you what color you absolutely should definitely be marking in. But I haven't. Because, in the few days that I've had to kind of put my show together, to do my research, that's not enough time to do a proper deep dive into what colours we ought to be using for marking. That's something that should come out of actual proper research. But what I have been interested in this week is colour theory, kind of why we have decided that red is a bad colour for us to do our marking in. And I do have some suggestions for alternatives. Now, none of the suggestions that I'm going to give are new, and in fact, all of them came up on the list of colours that people use. So, perhaps my conclusion is that the problem I've identified is a non-problem. Perhaps just the colour red is an issue and everything else is fair game. But I don't know. And I will be interested to hear what you have to say. So if you are listening live via Podbean, you can, of course, text into me through the Podbean app. If you are listening live elsewhere, be it on Spotify, on Apple Music, wherever it is you listen to us live, you can tweet me. I am at Mr. D. Lester. That's MRDLESTER. I have Twitter open and I will respond. If you are not listening live, you are listening on playback, you can still tweet me because, as I say every single week when I intro my topic, these are things that I'm interested in. They are things that I find fascinating. And my interests are fairly fixed in that I do find new things that I'm interested in, but I very rarely give up being interested on old things. So I'm sure even if you are listening to this on the 1st of June 2034, if I am still here, I will still be interested. So you can absolutely tweet me and let me know your thoughts on colour theory, on the colours that we ought to be using. Now, I'm going to preface this show, as I try to do whenever I feel I need to, with the fact that I am not an artist by any stretch of the imagination. I cannot draw, I cannot paint. I'm fairly sure that my year 9 art teacher was the most relieved woman on earth when she saw that my name was not on the GCSE art list. So I am not an artist, I'm not a psychologist. I am a linguist, I'm a classicist, I'm a teacher. So everything that I'm kind of saying to you has just come from the reading that I've done over the week, my own understanding of that reading, but it is, of course, a layperson's understanding. So again, I am welcome to be corrected if there are any artists or psychologists out there who are listening to me and I am spouting utter nonsense. Please do let me know. Because I like to learn as much as I like to teach. I was delighted, of course, the classicist in me was delighted when I started researching colour theory, and I learned that colour theory was pretty much first proposed by Aristotle. Bless him, or at least a work that is attributed to Aristotle. There is this treatise, Perichromaton, which we say comes from Aristotle. Sometimes people say it comes from Theophrastus. Sometimes people say it comes from Strato. But we know that colour theory, the idea that colours should be studied, that colours have specific attributes, it is classical in nature, as many of our sciences and things that are eventually proven to be pseudoscience are. And what's quite interesting for me about Perichromaton is that Aristotle, I'm going to kind of use Aristotle as shorthand for the writer, because the work is attributed to him. Aristotle was kind of doing the opposite of what I've just done. Aristotle didn't preface his work. Aristotle basically said, I've observed these things, therefore I know them. And he kind of asserts his work as fact. And it's one of those things that still happens today, mostly on social media, let's be honest, but we get a whole slew of people whenever anything happens, particularly something political, or in education, they kind of just assert what they're talking about. They assert their opinion as a fact. They assert their observation as a fact. I think clearly that is part of human nature. I think it stands to reason, again, I'm about to assert my opinion as a fact. I think it stands to reason that our brains kind of process what we believe as factual. They make up our own reality, they make up our own interpretation of the world. And so it makes sense that kind of to us, they would be true. They would be real. And I guess, in ancient Greece, when this idea of reporting observation to tell other people how the world works, it was being born, I suppose. It kind of stood to reason that people would say, oh, I have seen this, and therefore this. I've seen X, and so Y. It is a million miles away from the training that I'm doing as part of my doctoral studies about how absolutely everything needs to be supported by something else, by somebody else's observation, by somebody else's study. And it does loop background because we do our own research. I start my research project, my thesis, in February, all being well, and we say, I have studied this, I have observed this, and therefore this. It's the same basic premise. But I suppose the big difference is we are trained to go, I think this because other people have seen the same thing. Because there is this whole body of work that has come before me, this whole body of knowledge that has come before me that that informs what I say. And I guess back in ancient Greece, they didn't have that. They were the foundations of that body of knowledge. But anyway, that was a bit of a tangent. I apologize. Essentially, what Aristotle was arguing is that all colours, and so that by this he meant the classical colours, yellow, red, purple, blue, green, were made of a mix of black and white. That was essentially colour theory. He starts by ascribing colours to the elements. So, of course, the ancient Greeks believed that everything was made up of the four elements: earth, air, fire, and water, in different constitutions. And he ascribed colours to them. He said that water and air are white, fire is gold, and anything more complicated than white and gold comes down to a mix of the elements. So he said the earth is white itself, but it's dyed essentially because of a mix of the different elements within it. But unlike those colors, black itself isn't the result of a mixture of elements, but that it belongs to the elements while they are undergoing some kind of transformation. He kind of saw black as being a bit of an alchemical color, a color of change. And he said he wrote a whole long section on the color black right at the beginning of his work. He said that there are three types of black. First is when when light is reflected off it as black. He said, secondly, something can be black because the light coming off of it cannot reach the eye. And thirdly, he said something looks black because very little light is reflected back from it. And so he kind of saw black in these different shades. And he gave the example of rough water. So, of course, water as an element is white, but he said that rough water is dark, is black. Famously Homer or Ovid. Oh no, my classic credentials are going to be revoked because I don't remember which one it was. Somebody, I think it was Homer, described the wine dark sea. And Aristotle said that this is because the roughness of the surface allows very little light to bounce off of it and back into the eye. The deep water and very big clouds are black because light can't get through them, which means that very little light is reflected off of it, and so they are black. And so he kind of, in section 1 of his work on color, he kind of gets to grip with this concept of the color black and of all other color. Light itself, he says at the end of this section, does not have a color, but all colors are visible because of it. Things like fire or other things that produce light have light as their color, which of course itself does not have a color. He related this back to the elements, where he said the air and water turn black when they are burned by fire. And he said that this is the same as how coals turn black when they are doused in water. So For Aristotle, everything had a very simple colour. He then went on to talk about colour mixtures. So he said that the colour red is the result of something that is black being mixed with light, such as when black coals are burning, they turn red. And so again, you can kind of see where he got this idea from, because he noticed that when black coals burned, they turned red. And so it made sense to him that this base color black, when interacting with the light, because the color of fire is light, it turns red. Purple, he said, results when weak rays of light mix with something that is very light already, such as at sunrise or sunset. And again, you can kind of see that, he observed the sun rising, he observed the sun setting, he observed the purpley hues in the sky, and he goes, okay, weak light is purple. And so for him, simple colors were the result of mixtures between different levels of light and either black or white. Black and white are the constant, and then different levels of light produce every other color. Compound colors then for him were this mixture of light and black or white, but with another color mixed in that gives a unique appearance, a different appearance. Now, remember, this is before we had any concept of the color spectrum of refraction. This was when rainbows were believed to be the personification of the goddess Iris, the messenger of the gods. And so, he was making these observations and he was coming to some really quite logical conclusions about what he was seeing. In the third section of his work, he goes deeper into the disproportionate qualities of light, and he gives a quantitative difference between the levels of light and the levels of shade. And he said that different levels of light and different levels of shade can result in variations of one color, which of course is something that we continue to believe. When we teach children very basic color theory in reception in year 1, when they're painting, and we tell them that they can make pink by mixing red and white, or we tell them that they can make their blue a little bit darker by mixing some black in, we're taking Aristotle's basic color theory and applying it to things that are carrying on today. We're applying it to what we know today, and we are passing that knowledge on to our children. He then goes on to section 4, which is the shortest section of his book. This is all about dying. That's dying as colors, not dying as life ending. He says that an object takes on the color with which it is dyed, and that to dye something, the color, which was often a plant or a flower, is mixed with heat and water. And so while the thing that you are dyeing takes on a color, the space between it doesn't. So for example, if you've got a jumper made out of wool, the wool of the jumper can be dyed, but the space between the threads cannot. He said that these gaps are invisible. You don't see the space between the threads, but they do affect the appearance of the color because they allow light. He then quite definitely moves on to talking more about plants in section 5, where he talks about the color of plants. He says that the primary color of all plant life is green. There is a relationship between how it turns green when it is mixed with the sunlight, so that he has a kind of burgeoning understanding of chlorophyll and how that worked. He said that if you mix plants with water, then the water will turn green. If it's left with some time, it will turn black. But if fresh water is mixed back in it, it will turn green again. And that this is true for anything that is moist or that contains water, such as plant life. And it's the process of dampening that gives plant life its green color. And again, that's kind of true. I'm looking at my spider plants in my window, which I kind of go through peaks and troughs with when it comes to watering. I do unfortunately neglect them for quite a long time. And I was thinking about them the other day and how ratty they were looking. So I made an effort to water them this week, and they have kind of very quickly sprung back to life. And I don't know if that's psychosomatic, and I think that just because I watered them, they have resurrected themselves, or whether it is actually a thing. But again, you can kind of see where Aristotle was coming from. You can see when people are creating knowledge for the first time, why they might come to different conclusions. And for us as teachers, that's really important because that's what our children do, remember. I've done a whole show on social constructivism, so please do go back and listen to that if you haven't already. But there is this idea that knowledge is created by what we observe, what we kind of come into contact with every single day, and how other people perceive it. And that's kind of exactly what Aristotle is doing. He is creating knowledge in this book based on what he observed. So what our children do is exactly the same as what some of the most influential classical thinkers did. And I think that's really important to remember. I think it's really important to never underestimate what our children come into school knowing, in inverted commas, because the knowledge that they've created isn't always true. It's not always factual, it's not always correct, but it is knowledge that they've created. And sometimes we have to reinforce it, and sometimes we have to undo it and create new knowledge with them. And that's part of the excitement of teaching. But anyway, Aristotle was talking about, the color green. He talked about how the liquid inside the plant, the fruit, whatever it was, mixed with the rays of light and gave a color. So he was kind of giving credence to his own idea that light, didn't have a color, and light itself gave rise to color through what he was observing. Finally, in section 6, he talks about the color of skin, of hair, of plumage, and he says that those things act on a very similar principle to that of plants. So he said that you get white hair when the moisture in your hair dries up, and you get black hair when the hair gets old without drying out because of how much of it there is. Sometimes the moisture will dry up before it gets old, and in that case, your hair could be red or blonde or grey or any of the other colours. But essentially, it was all down to the amount of moisture. He said babies and the elderly, they had the whiter hair and paler skin than children and young adults because of the lack of sustenance flowing through them. So as babies aged, their features would darken because they would consume more food. There would be more liquid inside them, I suppose. And then as they got older, they would eat less, and so the discoloration would continue. So that is basically where color theory started. And there's a lot in there that is really interesting. For our purposes, of course, it doesn't really say very much because it doesn't talk about the psychology of color. It just talks about where color comes from. But it does give an interesting insight into how people perceive different colors. So, as I said kind of before I started talking about it, the ancients believed that there were 5 colors, essentially 5 basic colors: yellow, red, purple, blue, and green. You then had black and white, and light, which were less colours, I suppose, and more, I don't know, elemental forces, because it was the combination of those things that gave way to colour, that gave rise to colour. So you can see that for a long time we have prioritized colour. We have believed that colour is something that is important and that can have an effect. And that has been used kind of all throughout history. The idea that you can subtly influence things through your use of colour has long been used in art, in advertising, in presentation giving, in lesson planning. So, this idea that colour is influential is absolutely not new. It's not new to us as teachers, and it's certainly not new to us as human beings. But now that we know kind of why colour is important, now that we know that we as people believe that colour is important, let's have a think about different colours, and let's have a think about the impact or the influence that these different colours might have for us on our marking. Quite often, our children write in black pen. Those of us who have children who write in pen, of course, some of you, particularly those who teach younger years, your children may write in pencil. But for the most part, our children write in black pen. In England, certainly, when they complete their exams, the exams must be written in black pen. That's pretty much for ease of scanning. Now that papers tend to be scanned and emailed over to the markers instead of posted to them wholesale like they used to be, black does scan more easily. It's easier to read on the screen. But most people write in black. Black, psychologically, is a colour that evokes very strong emotion. It's an authoritative colour. It suggests power, stability, strength, and intelligence. So there is a kind of quite strong psychological argument for having our children write in black, which is that it gives their own work an air of authority. I would be interested, I couldn't find any research, but I would be interested if there were any research into neatness of presentation, neatness of handwriting. Not that I believe that's particularly important. As long as handwriting is legible, that's kind of what I go for, because my handwriting itself is not very neat at all. But I would be interested to know whether there was any correlation between the colour of pen and the neatness of the handwriting. Whether somebody who writes in black writes more neatly than somebody who writes in blue, because black has those connotations of stability and strength and intelligence and power. Blue, on the other hand, though, the other kind of popular ink colour, is most people's favourite colour. It is believed that many shades of blue actually cause the body to produce chemicals which are calming. So lots of people do find themselves calmed when they see blue, particularly kind of a light baby blue colour. Blue is psychologically associated with an idea of dependability, of wisdom, of loyalty, and of steadfastness. And studies in sports science, interestingly, suggest that sports are enhanced when the colour blue is present. So if, for example, a gym has blue as a primary colour scheme, the exercisers, I struggled for the word then, because that's how often I go to the gym. I don't even know what the word for people who go to the gym is. The gym goers will do more reps while they are there. Tim has texted in, "Good morning to you." As I always like to introduce Tim properly because he is a long-term friend of the show. He was, in fact, my very first and my very second guest in an incident that we still talk about, because my first show here on Teachers Talk Radio way back when was a bit of a disaster, and we couldn't quite get everything working properly, but we ended up pulling it together for the second show. Tim is a children's literature specialist and a writer for children. So actually, he might have some very interesting insights on to particularly pen color. He says, "My great aunt Laura was a chemist." Oh, okay, interesting. "She told me that writing in black was more professional than blue, and when she used a black pen, people Oh, interesting. When she used a black pen, people questioned her handwritten advice and notes less than when she wrote in blue." That's very interesting. That's very interesting. So that does, again, kind of correlate. It agrees with this idea that black is that color of stability and strength and intelligence. I think if I had the choice between a black pen and a blue pen, I would go for the black pen. Just kind of even without thinking, I would just reach for the black pen. So that is interesting. Grey. Now, grey, of course, we've touched on the children who write in pencil. Graphite is grey. We have our children write in grey pencils as opposed to, colouring pencils or whatever else they may be able to get their hands on. Grey is associated with practicality, with timelessness, with something that is solid. I suppose because rocks and boulders and things like that are grey. Grey tends not to evoke emotion. But it can often be an indicator of depression. And so I think it is quite interesting, I think, that if you gave most reception children, let's say, 4 or 5 years old, the choice between a grey pencil to write with and a red pencil to write with, they would probably opt for the red pencil. Now, again, that's not based on anything. I've not done this experiment. That's just my gut feeling of working with young children. So there is this what do I want to say? Middle of the roadness, I think, with grey. I think it's not particularly objectionable. I think if, we see children writing in a grey pencil, the children don't particularly mind writing in a grey pencil if that's all that is available to them. But I don't think they would choose it. I think if they were given the choice, they would go for a colour. So I think it's quite interesting that when children are learning to write, we have them do it with a grey pencil. We have them learn to write with something that is practical, something that is timeless, something that is solid, the way that writing is supposed to be. Now, obviously, there are more practical reasons why we get children to write in pencil, and that's because it can be rubbed out. So if they've formed their letters incorrectly, they can rub it out and try it again. If they've spelled something incorrectly, they can rub it out and they can try it again. They then graduate onto a pen. In England, pen licenses are a big thing. When their handwriting is considered to be neat enough, when their spelling is considered to be solid enough that they're not going to be perpetually crossing things out. Because, of course, when I was at school, you couldn't erase a pen. We did have those weird rubbers. Do you remember those that were like white on one side that would rub out pencil and then blue on the other side, and it claimed that they would rub out ink, but they never did. Mine always just kind of put a hole in the paper. Maybe that's what it was supposed to do. Maybe when it said that it would rub out the ink, what it actually meant was it would just destroy the bit of paper where the misspelled writing was. But I quite liked those. For all that they didn't work, I quite liked them. But yeah, I think, obviously we get our very young children to write in pencil so that it can be erased, so that they can try again. But I think there is a lot to be said by having young children writing in grey, so that they associate the act of writing with that practicality, with the timelessness, with the solidity, with the middle of the roadness that hopefully writing will have in their lives. So let's talk about red, shall we? The demon colour in teaching. Red is also most people's favourite colour. You know, if you were to ask anybody my age who their favourite Power Ranger was, they would quite often talk about the Red Ranger. And anybody who watched Power Rangers would quite often say the red one was their favourite. Superman is colour schemed red, yellow, and blue because they are contrasting colours, so it makes for a very standout outfit, but also because red and blue tend to be children's favourite colours. It's a very strong colour, it's a very energetic colour, it's a very vibrant colour. It has connotations of movement and of excitement. Now, interestingly, red is also the first colour that the eye is drawn to. And I can vouch for this just with a quick observation now. I've got Podbean open on my computer while I'm talking to you. And in case you've not seen Podbean, that's the platform through which we broadcast. It's actually a very interesting colour scheme because the background is a black. It's one of Aristotle's light blacks, not quite grey, but almost there. It has green branding because the brand colours of Podbean are green on black. The comments when people text in, like Tim has, they are in a grey speech bubble with white text. And whenever anybody likes the show, so whenever anyone pushes on the little the little heart to say that they've liked something that I've said, which, you know, please do if you like what I say. I like seeing that. That comes up in red. So I see a little red rectangle with a white heart, and then I see the number of times that you've liked something on the show. And when I'm looking at the Podbean interface just now, my eye is immediately drawn to the likes. The first thing that I see, so I've got Tim's texts that I read out earlier up on the screen right now. And so I see kind of what he said in the grey speech bubble. I've got the white writing of his text, and I've got the little red rectangle that tells me how many likes he's given the show. And that's the first thing that I see. That's the first thing that my eye is drawn to, which I suppose is why it's red. But let's think about that in terms of marking, particularly kind of old school marking where you pick out more of the inaccuracies or the mistakes than the things that were good. So a child opens up their exercise book. Let's say they've written in pencil. So it's a grey page, which is very neutral. They've got lots of red on the page, circles and crossings out and underlines and SP for spelling mistake, and that's the first thing that their eye is drawn to. Before they even read back over their work to see what they've written, they see the mistakes there written in red. All of a sudden, to me, why we shouldn't mark in red makes sense. And I don't think that it's what we were told. I don't think it's because red has negative connotations, because in colour theory, red has very positive connotations. It's about excitement, it's about energy, it's about movement, it's about life. I think it's because it's the first thing that we see when we look at a page. And if the first thing that you see when you look at your own work is all the stuff that you got wrong, you're going to be disheartened by it. And so I think that the point of marking kind of is at odds with the point of the colour red. I think if we marked positively, and if The only comments we gave was on the good stuff, and we did that in red, then we absolutely should continue to mark in red. And maybe if you are somebody who still does like a what went well, even better if, do you remember when that was all the rage a few years ago? Maybe the what went well could be in red, because the eye would be drawn to that, and the first thing that the child would see would be how they succeeded in the task. But if the first thing the child sees is how they failed in the task, and if that stands out to them, then that's going to have the negative impact. That's going to be them going, oh, okay, I'm not very good at this. Oh, I got all of this wrong. That's going to be where everything gets a bit disheartened. So I can kind of see why we are dissuaded from using the color red. I can kind of see why that's not a good thing for us to do. But I do wonder if we want to make more of the positives of what the children do in their work. Could we use red to do that? Could we mark in two colors and mark the good stuff in red and the room for improvement in a different color, so that the eye was automatically drawn to what was good? To me, that would make more sense than just demonizing the color red and just kind of wholesale saying we don't use red, which is what we've done as a profession, because I suppose that's easier. And when you have got 35 books to mark, particularly if you mark an essay heavy subject, if you're an English teacher or a history teacher, and you have got 35 year 11 past papers to mark, switching between pens, or double marking something, once looking for the positives, once looking for the negatives, that's time consuming. And so maybe just our blanket, no, we're just not going to use red, mark everything good and bad in the same color, is the most time effective thing for us to do. But let's be honest about that. Let's be honest that that's the reason that we're doing it. And let's not diminish the importance of the color red and the power that the color red has by saying that it's, harmful, it's damaging, it's got negative connotations, all those stuff that we were taught, which just isn't true. It's not true. It's just because it's the first color that your eye is drawn to. Pink, on the other hand, which for a long time wasn't considered its own color, it was always considered a shade of red, which is why for the Victorians, pink was a boy's color, because it was a shade of red. It was powerful. It was energetic. It was fun. It was excitable. Pink is suggested to be the most calming of colors, which I think is interesting. And so I wonder whether marking in pink, I do know a teacher who marks in pink. I should have thought to speak to her before doing this show to see what her opinion was. But I wonder if marking in pink has an effect. I wonder whether it makes children feel a bit more positive about correcting their mistakes, because it is seen as being the most calming color. Green, of course, a color so important that Aristotle devoted a whole section of perichromaton to it, the color of growth, the color of nature, and of course, thanks to the American economic system, it's quite often considered to be the color of money. Due to Shakespeare, it has connotations of envy. Oh, beware, my lord, of jealousy, it is the green-eyed monster which doth mock the meat it feeds on. It's considered to be the color of good luck, green clovers. It's also considered a color of generosity. It's a color of peace, of harmony, of nurturing, of support, and of energy at pace. So it's kind of the toned down version of red, if you like, which I think is why so many schools opted for green. When we decided that we weren't going to do red anymore, many schools went for green, as their marking colour of choice. Now, I'm going to be honest, I don't like marking in green, and that's only because the shade of green that you get in a biro, which of course is what we are given by most schools because you can get them in those nice big multi-packs, I don't find that a very easy shade to read. I will quite often look back over my own books and struggle to find where I've marked things or struggle to read my comments because that shade of green is not particularly easy. I think it should be a bit darker if we're going to use green, and not that weird kind of, not quite lime green, but close to it, that very light shade of green. Yellow's an interesting one. Yellow is another one that I don't think anybody would advocate marking in because, again, very hard to read on white paper. But interestingly, I was talking about this with somebody the other day. When I was at university, we were told that our PowerPoints should be yellow text on blue background. And in fact, all of the university's PowerPoints were yellow text on blue background because that was easier for children with dyslexia to read. Now, I don't know if that's still the case. I should know if that's still the case, but I don't. I do still just tend to default to yellow text on blue background, and no one has ever complained about it. I think as part of my next kind of CPD drive, I should double check that and see whether that is still the case. But yellow is not a very common colour in education, but it is a favourite among children. It's associated with happiness, with good feeling, with laughter, and this is because the brain releases more serotonin when it processes yellow than when it processes any other colour. Unfortunately, though, because of this serotonin release, yellow can be very overpowering. It can be very overwhelming. Because your brain finds it quite difficult to process all of the serotonin, or your body finds it difficult to process all of the serotonin that is being secreted. So I think that's possibly another reason that we tend to shy away from it in school, is because we don't want our children to be overwhelmed there by it. But it is quite interesting. I think it is quite interesting to note that it's a positive colour, and it is a colour that we do tend to see in displays, in signs in the corridor, that sort of thing. It's just not one that we tend to use very often ourselves. Orange, that lovely midway between red and yellow, is a colour of ambition. So again, I think maybe if we were to do dual-toned marking, positives in one colour, room for improvement in another, then orange for positives would be a good way to go. It's often associated with fun times, with happy times, with energy, with warmth, of course, because of the sun. Again, it's interesting, isn't it, that we still have all of these things that Aristotle associated, or that Aristotle used when he came up with his colour theory, when he was talking about colours. We still have these same associations. We still make these same links. The colour of nature is still incredibly important to us. Purple. Purple's my favourite. I love the colour purple. Purple is royalty. Purple is prosperity. Purple is sophistication. Purple actually stimulates the parts of the brain for problem solving. So I think that purple is a colour that should be more often embraced by maths teachers. And in particularly in upper key stage 2, where you start to do quite a lot of problem solving in maths, in science, even in English, for children who are going to take the 11 plus, or are going to take any kind of entrance exam into anything, lots of purple should be used for them to stimulate that problem-solving area of the brain. Purple can be quite mysterious. It can invoke an air of wisdom, and it can invoke an air of respect. I'm beginning to understand why I like purple. I like all of those things. Brown is an interesting one. It's quite rare to get pens in brown, so we likely would not mark in it, but it's a colour of reliability, of stability, and of friendship. So brown might actually be a good colour to mark in because it's stable. It shows the child, I may be critiquing your work, but you can rely on me to make it better. Of course, brown is in India a colour of mourning, and that's something to be mindful of when thinking about colour theory. Is that while there are certain physiological things that happen, such as levels of serotonin secreted when we see certain colours, there are also cultural contexts to different colours which must be taken into account when we think about using them. So that's kind of a shallow dive, I suppose, on different colours, on the psychology of different colours. And I do think it's quite interesting. I do think it's an interesting thing for us to think about, because colour is so ubiquitous, because colour is kind of everywhere. And because colour does have such a profound impact, both psychologically and physiologically, I do think that it's a thing that we really need to give more credence to.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading.
Reading Solutions UK. Are you looking for best practices and innovative strategies to foster confident, lifelong readers? Join the free online International Reading Conference on the 11th, 12th and 13th of June. Hear from speakers like TV personality and education expert Basit Siddiqui, beloved children's author Michael Rosen, fluency expert Tim Rosinski, EEF specialist Chloe Butlin, the National Literacy Trust's Irene Picton, and a range of experienced practitioners, including MATS leaders, deputy heads, heads of English, high-level teaching assistants, and school librarians. Through the 3-day conference, speakers will explore a range of topics at the forefront of the current educational landscape, with sessions relevant for all educators and key stages. Visit Reading Solutions at readingsolutionsuk.co.uk for more information and to sign up for this free conference.
So, if we're thinking about marking, we want to think about the impact that we're having. You know, if we are spending all of this extra time outside of the classroom giving feedback on our children's work, we want to make sure that it is having an impact. We want to make sure that it's actually doing something. And I mentioned the idea before of two-toned marking, you know, the idea that positives could be in red and rooms for improvement could be in green. And that way we are setting children up for success by having the first thing that their eye is drawn to being something positive. And I conceded that this is actually going to take a lot of time, because switching over pens over and over again every time you want to mark something, or double marking it once in red and once in green, that is going to take time. But I think one of the things that we do need to consider, particularly when we're talking about workload, which is another big issue in teacher retention and recruitment, is time spent versus impact had. Would I rather spend, let's say, 2 minutes marking a piece of work in green that a child then overlooks, doesn't read, and doesn't respond to? Or would I rather spend 5 minutes marking in green and red, but the child then does pay attention and does act on the feedback? Because if I'm marking in just one colour and it's ignored, that's a complete waste of time. Whereas if I'm marking in 2 colours, yes, it is taking more time, but at least the time has been spent fruitfully. And I would rather my time be spent fruitfully. I would rather something come from the time that I am spending doing my marking than not at all. I was reading the Tips for Teaching blog, and a writer, Paul, has written about marking here, and he is a head of faculty who wants his teachers to mark, and I quote, in a way that has the smallest impact on their time, but the highest impact on learners' progress, which I think is what we all want. I think that's the perfect balance. And his technique is highlighting. Now, interestingly, he's gone for a traffic light system. So in green is highlighted good work. In yellow, highlighted work that needs to be reworded or rewritten. And red is highlighted things that are incorrect. And what I found interesting about the traffic light system is that it does kind of work the opposite way around to what I think would be better based on the colour theory research that I've done this week. Because again, the children's attention will be automatically drawn to the stuff in red, the stuff that they need to improve, rather than the stuff that they got right. But the traffic light system is ingrained in us as part of our cultural experience, as part of our cultural understanding. Green for go, red for stop. So it does kind of make sense that you would use green for good work and red for this needs improvement. He then says that there is a color-coded sticker placed at the end of the piece of work, which has 2 or 3 bullet points indicating room for improvement. So you are then kind of keeping that color consistent, but still kind of pointing out what needs to be improved. Because notice, everything is highlighted. Nothing's actually written on the work until you get to this sticker. So you could then, on the sticker, indicate stuff that you would have otherwise spent time writing out by hand. In his Feedback at Key Stage 3 downloadable resource, he actually expands on this and uses other colours. So beyond the green, yellow, and red, he used blue to indicate where an example should be added. Purple, if the child needs to come and see the teacher, if there's obviously a grave misunderstanding that needs to be re-explained. And orange can be used as other, as another way of doing it. And I think that's interesting. And I think the expansion makes it a lot more time consuming, if I'm honest. I think what you would need to do if you were going to do that many different colours is pick out for each marking session which areas you were going to focus on. I would maybe even just limit it to the 3. And I think if you were going to do something like that and broaden out the number of colours that you were using, you would want to make sure that it was consistent, not just across the faculty, but across a school, so that the children got used to which colour meant what without having to refer back to the key. Because if they have to keep looking back at the key to figure out what each colour highlight means, they're not going to. They're just going to start ignoring it. Because you want to make marking and feedback as easy to process as possible. You want to make sure that they don't need to spend any extra time figuring out how to improve, in the same way that we don't want to spend any extra time doing the marking. So I don't know how I feel about adding that extra layer, but I do think that the traffic light system, the green for good, yellow for good but needs to be reworded, and red for incorrect, I think that could work quite well, particularly because it's very rare, I think, that a child will produce something that is entirely incorrect. Depending, of course, on what subject you teach. Obviously I teach, well, I say obviously, if you are a long-term listener, long-term friend of the show, you will know that I teach languages and classics. And so for me, it is very often that a child gets something absolutely wrong. It's more often that it just needs to be reworded or reworked. It's more likely, for example, that a child would write something in the past tense when they meant the present tense, which is a rewording, than they would write completely the wrong verb, so it doesn't make sense. Sometimes it doesn't make sense, particularly if they've used an online translator. But it's more often than not that it just could do with a rewording. So I think if I were to adopt the traffic light system, I would find myself using a lot of green, a fair bit of yellow, and red only very minimally. And I think that's quite an interesting concept, isn't it? Differentiating between this is actually wrong and this just needs rewording. And I think in all subjects, that would be quite an interesting thing for us to think about. What actually constitutes a wrong answer versus this just needs to be changed ever so slightly. If you were to just alter how you said this, it would be absolutely fine. And I think we could do a lot for our children's self-esteem if we put some thought into that. But that's moving away from colour theory. And that's kind of all I wanted to talk to you about today. So I am going to say thank you very much for listening. I hope that this has been as interesting for you as it has been for me. Like I said, I haven't come to a conclusion. Well, I have. I've come to the conclusion that we need to use more than one colour to mark in. And I've come to the conclusion that red isn't the demonising colour that we're being told it is. What I haven't come to the conclusion of, though, is what colour we should be using for marking. And why. So I am kind of part of the problem that I alluded to at the beginning, in that I have come to us with a problem that we are demonising the colour red in marking and we shouldn't, but I haven't actually been able to provide a solution for this problem. But hopefully, if I've got any educational researchers out there listening, and if I don't, maybe I will just do this myself in a few years once my doctorate is done. Let's do some research into this. Let's figure out not what colours we should not be using for marking, but what colours we should be using for marking, so that we can make marking as optimal as possible. Please do stay tuned to Teachers Talk Radio, because we have got a whole slew of amazing shows for you over the next couple of weeks. I am not here next Saturday because I am teaching. However, particularly for my MFL people out there, please do remember that we have a Teachers Talk event next Saturday. It's the Teachers Talk MFL event online. So if you have not yet signed up for your ticket, please do go ahead and do that. I am not speaking at this one because I'm teaching, but I will be looking forward to kind of having everybody on in the background, kind of around my lessons, and catching up on what everybody has to say. So I will be back with you for breakfast in 2 weeks' time. Until then, have a good start to the next term. Keep in touch. Let me know what you have thought about today's show, and I will see you all soon. Thank you and goodbye. That was the wrong one. We're ending, not beginning.
This show is brought to you. This show is.
No, and that's the advert. What am I doing today? Right, this is the closing credits.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.